Hi, everyone. My name is Cooper Knowlton, and I'm joined with Lee Bergstein today for a BFK brief. I'm not sure if that's what we're still calling these, but
Whatever, call it whatever you want.
Figured we've been talking a little bit internally about this recent news report that just came out saying that more buyers who are currently in contract are ending contracts than at a higher rate since basically pre-pandemic. And we've kind of been seeing one real estate market trending in one direction for largely 2.5 years now. And it seems like that is beginning to change, and there's some real changes happening right now. And wanted to just sort of pick your brain a little bit because it's always useful for me to get my head around these type things, and I'm sure for many of our clients as well. So maybe you could just start off by just sort of explaining what you see happening, maybe anecdotally, also just kind of what you heard, what this article says.
Yeah, so I think the article was not really surprising, and what it says is that roughly 60,000 home purchase agreements across the country that went under contract in June fell through. And that's the highest percentage since March of 2020, when the pandemic started. Not surprising, because anyone who was looking for a house or bought a house or knows someone who bought a house, anybody in the real estate industry knows that pretty much right after the pandemic started, as people migrated to the suburbs, they were waiving every type of contingency when
Right.
purchasing their home. Appraisals, inspections, mortgage, because the competition was so fierce. The bidding was so wild that it was the extra leverage you needed to get the house you wanted. So not surprising now, as interest rates go up, and it's a little bit more of a buyer's market, that buyers are not agreeing to those contingencies anymore, which gives them the levers to get out of a deal potentially if a house doesn't appraise or if they don't get their mortgage.
Right. So, noticing this change in the market, are there specific things that you think really buyers or sellers should be thinking about, or maybe protections that they should be thinking about as they approach purchasing or selling their property?
Well, I think the first thing is that you want to kind of, if a seller is asking for you to waive, if you're a buyer and a seller is asking you to waive contingencies, inspection, and you're not comfortable doing that, the market's really not dictating that you have to do that anymore. So I'd say from a buyer's perspective, you just want to make sure that you're giving yourself the same protections that you would have given yourself in 2019. From a seller's perspective, the seller is going to want the opposite, right? But I think the seller's less likely to want to cancel. So it's about making sure that the buyer is limited to the specific kind of market standard contingencies, and then isn't using those in a pretextual way to kind of give themselves an option, right?
Sure.
The purpose, for instance, of the mortgage commitment contingency is the buyer has to operate in good faith to apply for a loan. And usually they've already shown the seller that they can get that loan. They've provided a commitment, they've provided whatever else they have to provide, a pre-approval that they're going to be able to get the loan. The buyer can now use that clause to go to the lender and say, hey, don't give me my loan anymore so I can get out of this deal. So I think sellers just need to be a little more sensitive to that, for buyers to kind of use these clauses in a way that they're not intended to be used, to give themselves an option to kind of track interest rates, track the market, and then back out of a deal if they don't want to do that. Most buyers are of course not doing that, but it happens. So I think it's more about a seller just being diligent and making sure that they're working with professional counsel to ensure that the buyer is not taking advantage of any of the tools at their disposal.
What about for someone who's actually currently in contract and now feels like there may be some pushback from the buyer, pushback from the seller, kind of changing some of the initially pre-agreed upon terms, what would you say to someone in that situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's really tough, right? Because it's usually more like there's not going to be a smoking gun document that comes across your desk that says, "Hey, the buyer is trying to pull a fast one here." It's usually more intuition or gut, or that it doesn't really make any sense that they didn't get the loan based on what they told you, or the house really should have appraised. Why didn't it appraise? Something's going on. Um, so it's difficult. What I would say is buyers and sellers very often can get locked into a dispute over a contract deposit after there's a termination or a breach. Um, Depending on the price point of the house, that might not be the best economic path for both sides. So if you're a seller and a buyer wants to back out of the contract, they approach you and they say, "Hey, we lost our commitment." I don't think that necessarily the best approach is to say, "We don't believe you," or
Mhm.
"Prove it to us." It's, all right, is there some type of economic solution here that makes sense that we can move on from you, get our house back on the market, and sell it to somebody who actually wants to live here? And likewise for the buyer, so that we can, we weren't approved for this house for some reason. Is there some economic solution apart from litigating that will allow us to get some of our money back, or all of our money, depending on what's decided, and move on to the next opportunity?
And have you heard of that happening? Have you heard of a amicable split where there's potentially some kind of liquidated damages or some penalty that's paid for someone backing out of the deal?
Yeah, I mean, well, look, almost every real estate contract has a liquidated damages clause. So if the buyer cancels or backs away or doesn't close and they don't have a good reason, then it might cost a lot of money for both sides, but eventually the seller is probably going to get that contract deposit. On the flip side, if the seller breaches, the buyer is probably going to get it back. Um, or if there's a specific performance clause, they'll be forced to sell. Uh, yeah, it happens, and it should happen. I think most professionals who are advising their clients in the residential space when something like this happens, is it's really not worth the time or money. But sometimes it is. It depends on the amount of money at stake. It depends on the facts. It depends on the reason for breach, reason for termination. But I think what should be clear from this conversation, this article, is we're not really operating in a pandemic housing market anymore from a negotiation standpoint.
Yeah.
So if a seller is trying to, whether the seller's broker or the seller's attorney or the seller themselves are trying to impose upon you terms that feel very much reflective of what's been going on for the last 2.5 years, that might not be uh, the best deal for you if you feel like you need all the protections that would be available to you prior to 2019.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
It's a good
Very
place.
interesting. I'm sure this will be a continuing develop, or a story that will continue to develop over the next coming months. And as always, if you have any questions on this topic, please feel free to reach out, and hopefully we'll hear from you soon. Thanks.
Bye, Cooper.
Bye, Lee.